Thanks so much for tuning in today. I am delighted to introduce those of you who haven't met her yet and give you, those of you who already love her books, an opportunity to hear from my dear friend, Sarah Sundin. So Sarah, would you like to take a minute and introduce yourself?
My name's Sarah Sundin. I live in California and I write historical fiction set during World War II.
And not just historical fiction. Her stuff is amazing. So we've got Joy, Waven, and Anastasia, Jocelyn. So thanks so much for joining in, y'all. And as always, drop comments there in the comment area if you have questions or you want to say anything. But first of all, I want to ask those of you who are here, do you have a favorite series of Sarah's? Because this is, you've got 3 series or 4? You've got 4.
Four complete.
Some of the others are actually, I realized the latest series is back there. And then when Twilight Breaks just released 2 weeks ago, was it even long ago?
3. I think it's 3 now, February 2nd. So
that is crazy
yeah.
Because you are the most amazing World War II writer because of all the research you do. So as this one's set in Munich in 1938, so right as all the conflict is building up, what was the most interesting piece of research that you found that you couldn't use in the book?
I couldn't use, oh my goodness. Oh, oh, I don't know. There's so much. Some of it that was stuff that was going on behind the scenes that she couldn't have known, that they couldn't have.
Because you reference like one of the plots to overthrow Hitler, and obviously that one didn't work because we still have the war. And she would know, she kind of knew about it, but not really.
Yeah, and that was real. There were generals who said if Hitler invades Czechoslovakia, as he threatened to do in late 1938, if he does so, we are going to overthrow him because this is not who we are. And so, of course, the British and the French, as they're negotiating in the Munich conference, couldn't have known that. They had, that might have changed things if they'd known. But yeah, it's one of those we'll never knows of histories.
Yeah, well, and I have read your books from the very first one, Distant Melody, or I think,
yes.
And so, I mean, I've been reading your books for forever. My 20-year-old daughter adores them. Actually, this is probably her favorite.
Oh, funny, yeah.
Because this one had the nurses, right? The nurses, and
nurses.
And then you had the pilots, and you just got all this great stuff going on. But I thought I loved World War II research until we did this one together. And I decided you are the research queen because you had the most elaborate spreadsheets to track all the details. And this was so much fun because it was you, Tricia Goyer, and me writing a series of connected novellas, which was such fun.
It was a blast.
It's a challenge to keep everybody kind of going in the same direction and not being redundant. And you did a beautiful job with that. So how do you keep all the research straight that you do? And people are just popping in going, oh, I love the nurse series. I love this series. And so why World War II? And then from that, how do you track all the research and everything? Because these are authentic. I wouldn't recommend them if I was like, oh, you're cheating the research. So why World War II? And then how do you get all that real live detail?
Well, why mostly comes from family. My grandfather was a pharmacist mate in the Navy. That's a medic. The Navy has different names for everything. And I'm speaking as a former Navy mom. My son he's 22-year-old veteran. I still can't.
Right? Isn't that crazy?
22-year-old veteran. Anyway, so the Navy does everything different. So anyway, he was a pharmacist mate, but he was a storyteller too. So he came home. I found out later that so many veterans came home and their way of processing of dealing with what they've been through was to not talk about it, leave it behind and get on with their new lives. My grandfather wasn't like that. He was a talker, he was a storyteller. And so he told stories about his experiences. And of course, that was wonderful for me. And his brother was a B-17 bomber pilot and, quite a hero. He flew a B-17 bomber under the Golden Gate Bridge, which was not a...
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
That's daring to get that big
Yeah.
of a plane underneath there. Oh
There's
my.
room, but it's tight. And he also was in the squadron of 12 B-17s that were flying into Pearl Harbor during the attack.
Oh
So
my goodness. How did I not know this?
I don't know. It comes out in a lot of interviews, but yeah, he was quite, so he was a Pearl Harbor survivor, and really, really great stories. And then he went on and flew with the 8th Air Force based in England. So,
Okay.
which is why I said my first series, Wings of Glory, in the 8th Air Force to honor him. But anyway, so that's why. And then my other grandfather, the one who inspired When Twilight Breaks, he was unable to fight because he had a heart murmur and he had rheumatic heart disease as a child. So he wasn't able to fight. But he was a professor of German. So he used his skills and his knowledge of German and German culture to train American soldiers later in the war. So I know.
I thought that was such a neat, I guess I was like, oh, what a creative way to approach a hero, an American who would be in Germany at that time, because that's one of the challenges. Like when I was writing Shadowed by Grace, was coming up with what's a valid career choice that a woman in 1940s World War II would have that would get her to Italy. And so I was thinking the same thing as I was reading this one and going, okay, Peter's in Germany, and it made so much sense, but I didn't realize that was based on one of your relatives. That's so cool.
Yeah, actually, that's what inspired the story. We were at Ellis Island, and I put his name into the computer. I was actually trying to find more like when his family come over from, they were German, when they come over from Germany, 1880s or so, but it turned out it came out before Ellis Island. But the record came through Ellis Island, the computer, that of his trip from Hamburg, Germany to New York in 1936. And I knew he'd studied in Germany. He did a junior year abroad, very, Ivy League, and this is his textbook that he co-wrote.
Oh, that is so cool.
One of my favorite things. So anyway, but I'm looking at this going, 1936. It wasn't that he studied in Germany. He studied in Hitler's Germany, and that's what sparked the story. Like, what would it have been like to have been an American?
Yeah.
And working in Nazi Germany. And of course, this was before the war. And I set my story in 1938, which a little more dramatic, a lot of things going on in 1938. But yeah, it was fascinating. A lot of what my grandfather did, let's see if I can find a page, diagrams, he put his book about how to pronounce and this was revolutionary at the time. And so I kind of used his research in Peter's research. So that was fun.
That is so cool, because having spent a couple months in Germany when I was teaching there one summer, getting the umlauts and stuff like that, I'm like, I'll never get it. My tongue doesn't work that way. And it's interesting because my maternal grandfather's family came from Germany in the 1880s and all of that. And when we were there, we tried to kind of find it, but it was this tiny little village somewhere that I'm like, I'm never going to get there. But it's so fun when we can pull those family connections in. And so Linda's talking about how she had an aunt who was a Wok, and then an uncle was at Normandy and married a British lady. And, Stacy's grandpa was there. There is something I think about World War II that is, I don't want to say it's romantic because it was a war, but there was just something about that time period. Someone else was mentioning earlier about Linda talking about loving the music and the movies. And like, one of my ideal things is curling up with like a Thin Man or, a Cary Grant classic movie. And there's nothing like Glenn Miller. And so you capture that whole vibe so well. Do you like that time period's movies and things as well? Or is it something you've had to kind of train yourself to like?
Well, the movies I always liked. The funny thing with music, I was never big into it. And I started listening to it when I started writing A Distant Melody. And, some of them kind of cracked me up because, I'm a child of the 80s. So, corny. But so some of the lyrics are corny, but the music I love. I just love the music. And of course, now I embrace what my generation would call corniness. But the funny thing is my kids' generation, they're in their 20s. and they think anything retro. And we took them to Knott's Berry Farm, which is, I grew up in California, and there's this ghost town, and it was built in the 50s, and it's all, from the 1950s, the cowboy, and so I grew up thinking, and I worked at Knott's Berry Farm when I was in college, and we loved Ghost Town, but it was like, oh, it's so hokey, it's so corny. And my kids are going through this, and it has not changed. It has not changed at all. My kids are walking through, this is the best. And like, I thought they'd be like, oh, it's so corny. Like so the generation perspective, they're like, this is amazing. It's retro.
Yeah. Well, and that's, I think, one of the things, because like I look back at it and I look at those movies, and Bringing Up Baby is so hokey, but it's just fun. And it happened one night, and all of those movies, and I love sprinkling them in because they're just not necessarily always wholesome, but they're sweet, and there's still an innocence to most of them that I think is sometimes harder to find today. And my kids have worn out my Thin Man series of DVDs. They're their favorites too. I've corrupted them. And
it reminds me of when I went and bought my first World War II CD, the big band CDs. So when I was doing it. So that was 2001. My daughter, she was 6. Okay, she was 6 years old. So I'm at the music store buying CDs. This already dates it. And she looks at me with those big eyes, and she says, "Mommy, is that Christian music?" I said, well, no. She goes, "You can't buy that." And I'm looking at it going, actually, yes, I can, because this is back when everybody could listen to music and not be like, anyway, everybody from grandmas to children and everybody in the middle could listen to the same. You could go to the same movies, you could listen to the same music, and you don't have to worry about what kids are saying. I'm trying to explain this to my little girl who's like, I can't see anything but a G movie. And we just love it. So yeah, it was how things.
Yeah, that's so fun. And people are chiming in, like Stacy's like, I love hokey, and Janice is talking about how her 24-year-old loves the Beatles and Benny Goodman, etc. And I think there is something that, even when I think about what my older kids are listening to, and they're 20 and 17, and just that idea that a lot of it's kind of the stripped down, kind of folksy kind of music, which in some ways to me feels more like a Glenn Miller kind of song than a more contemporary song. Now, Arletta is talking about how her mother-in-law was adopted by her childless aunt and uncle during World War II. And so, Arletta, I just have to ask, because one of my books involves children who were evacuated from England to the United States. So was she evacuated to the countryside in England, or had they come to the US? Because I can remember going through the British War Museum, the Imperial War Museum, and just happening on an exhibit related to the children who were evacuated. And based on the title, I thought it was going to be something very different, and I wasn't going to go. We actually had gone to the bookshop, and then I was like, oh my gosh, this is about children evacuated during World War II. And I literally drug my husband through it. We had like 10 minutes, and I'm taking photos of everything. And that became a book, because it was that little spark, that little, what would it have been like? What kind of, challenges would that have created in the home to take this child from Britain and bring them into strangers' homes? And so, it's just kind of fun. And man, I love all the comments. This is great. So Janice asked a question that I think is a really good one. What led you to write romance? Because they're not just World War II. They're phenomenal World War II stories, but there's also the hope of a romance. And so why do you do that? What was the inspiration for that?
I started with romance before I started with historical. My first 2 novels that should never, please never publish them, but they were contemporary romance. But I've always been drawn to romance. My favorite movies are like You've Got Mail. Yeah, it's like, love story. I just love stories. And wherever whenever I'm watching a movie, I'm always looking for the romance. So I can't imagine not writing a romance. And people say, oh, you should just write some straight historical fiction. I'm tired of romance. Like, it's usually for me, it's the the first thing, I'll usually be a research spark that inspires the idea, but then the next thing is like, who are these characters, and love. So
Yeah.
that's what drives the passion for the story for me, is these two people finding each other and overcoming their obstacles. And that's the rest of it is supporting that to me, for me.
Yeah.
And we're all different writers, but for me, the romance drives the story.
Well, I love that you said that, because everybody comes at it a little differently. And so for people who've been tuning in every week or have watched these later, you'll see that, like Bethany Turner, it's all about the cute meat and the humor. And I couldn't do that. Like, contemporary romance to me is not my preferred genre. I want it to be historical, or I want there to be suspense. I need something else plus the romance, because let's face it, romance, especially Christian romance, it's kind of a foregone conclusion. They are going to get together. We just don't know how they will get together. So with writing romance, you've got, let's talk tropes, because in this one, I would say it's almost a haters to lovers kind of thing.
Yeah.
All these sparks. I know that's not the official name of the trope, but that's what it felt like. Is that what you were going for?
It's funny thing is, I never heard the word tropes until a few years ago, and realized I do use them, but it's just more like, who are they?
Yeah.
And what is their story? And it's like, well, and I knew from the start they had, and I deliberately put them on opposite ends where they would be opposed to each other, and that was their thing, that they saw Germany in different ways, but that there's a spark that's drawing them together, not just the attraction, but they just have general things, and they have other things in common. They have different political views nowadays, but there's so much that they have a love of classical music. They have they're witty. They love hiking. I mean, there are all these things that draw them together, and they just enjoy each other's company. But their political views are so far apart that they can't, that couldn't possibly bring them together. So, and unfortunately, when I had the story idea, it was before, when the political environment was very different. But obviously, it feels very current now as we become more extreme. And so anyway, so for that, and then I'm thinking about the next book and I'm writing, and I'm thinking about what's going on with their stories. And I don't deliberately pick a trope. Well, I did once with The Land Beneath Us. I said, I wanted to write a marriage of convenience story to make that work in World War II.
That's the one I haven't written yet. And
I know, it's like, it's huge in Christian fiction. It's like, and how can I make that work in you that actually works? It's not like, just, fabricated. It's like, I don't make it realistic. And so that was the only time where I selected a trope, and yes, I want to make that work. And usually it's just like, well, but who are they, and why did they fall in love, or what keeps them apart? And so, but then afterwards it's like, oh yeah. And I what I often do is friends to lovers. I do that a lot. I just those are, exactly. Those appeal to me, because I love the stories of where love develops from friendship. I feel that also provides a more realistic base especially for young women who are like, I want this to be, and they're like, I want my future husband to be just like Peter. It's okay, that's great. But if you have insta love in every book, they're like, well, he's going to see me.
I don't feel that.
It's like, well, and that does happen. I know so many people who have love at first sight stories, but more often it's overcoming obstacles and slowly coming to like each other and to love each other. And I'm having fun. My oldest son is engaged, and it's cute now hearing their stories from their first date. And she's like, yeah, I wasn't so sure about him. He told me the story about squirrels, and I think his cat had caught a hamster had literally fallen from the ceiling in his apartment, and his cat ate it. It's like, Stephen, why'd you tell her that story on your first date? So
she knows what to expect, right?
And she knows what to expect. But so she's thinking, like, he's a hamster hater. Like, do I really, like,
can he father children?
I don't care. So she's telling me these stories like, oh, Stephen, I cannot believe she went out with you again.
So I'm going to ask what a trope is. And a trope is just this idea that there are a certain number of ways that people get together. So friends to lovers, enemies to friends to lovers, and there's all kinds of different kind of stories. And marriage of convenience is actually a really big one in CBA, and I haven't quite figured out why. But it can be really cute, and it creates a whole different dynamic. The book I'm reading right now is somewhere over here in the stack. I'm almost done with it. Oh yeah, I'm going back and binging Christy Ann Hunter's books because I just finished her new one that'll come out. And this is a marriage of convenience, but it's done in a very fresh way. And so I've been enjoying it and going, oh, I see what she's doing. Oh, that's cute. So Stacey asked, well, first, Lynn asked, have you ever had a character that has taken you in a different direction? And Stacey asked, which of your characters is the most like you? So why don't we start with, have you ever had a character take you in a different direction? And I can't really think of one. Oh, I can think of one. In A Promise Born, it's one of my early World War II books, set in Ohio with the Enigma, breaking the Enigma code and all that. And I was not writing books that had a salvation message in them. I was like, that's not what I want to do. And Evelyn wasn't a Christian. And I was like, okay, God, I guess this is her journey. And so, because I was so adamant, I didn't want to write those check the box conversion chapters. And he was like, well, but this is her story. And I also had that with Delayed Justice, where, again, Jamie, that was so organic to who she was. That I'm like, it has to go that direction, even if I kind of resist it. So how about you?
Usually, well, no, in general, no, because
You're a plotter.
I'm a plotter. So I do so much planning before I write the story. So I really get to know my characters really well before I start the rough draft. And I've also
spreadsheets, lots and lots of spreadsheets.
Yes. I know what's going to happen pretty much in every chapter. Now it changes, and it's almost like it kind of goes like this. So at the very beginning, I follow it very closely, and it gets closer to the end, it really goes away from my outline, and then I'm like, well, how does that go? Oh no, that's not going to work. Oh wait, that didn't happen. So it diverges more as I get closer to the end, or it's usually like I know my ending. There's something about my ending that doesn't sit right, and I've got to fix it. And so anyway, but in general, my characters don't go off the path in a big way, but they say things that surprise me. And I love that, and I always go with it. And my favorite one is in The Sky Above Us. And Adler, who's the hero, has just put together, Violet is the Red Cross worker at his air base, and she's put together this elaborate Easter party. And Adler and his best friend have just come in with his best friend just dressed up as Easter Bunny, and he surprised her. And she's so excited about that. And then he goes up and he plays the trumpet, which is huge for him. And she considers that he'd already told her he had a surprise for her. And so those two things come in. Her heart is full. She's starting to fall in love with him. And she says, oh, that was just the best surprise. And he says, that wasn't the surprise. And I looked at him, I said, well, yes, it was, Adler. That was a surprise. And he says, nope. And he had something else. And it was a direction I'm like, what is your surprise then? What are you talking about? And then I realized what it was. I was like, oh, and then that became a little side plot that I worked in, and I worked it in later. So it was just this other side character. And so every once in a while, it's something little like that. And I always follow it. When he says something like that, that wasn't the surprise. Like, well, what?
So where do you want the surprise to be?
And he said it. I didn't. Like, well, I've got to listen to him because this is his story. So every once in a while they'll say something, and I'm very careful to listen to them, because oftentimes I'll try to write back into my outline, and they'll start resisting me. So even with all my outlining, there are still surprises along the way, but they tend to be the micro surprises rather than the macro ones.
But I think that's what pantsers don't understand. I write both ways. I have done very plotted books. I've done kind of in the middle. I've done more, I'm just kind of seeing where the story goes kind of books. And they all involve plotting. It just depends on when you do it. You know, exactly. Are you taking the time at the beginning, or are you backtracking? And it can be much more efficient if you do it moving forward, because there are still surprises. And then there are other times where you know, this, I have to do kind of the more scattered approach and write it. Linda was talking about writing from the middle. You can absolutely do that. I tend to be much more linear. I think it's the lawyer.
Yeah,
It's like you're a pharmacist, so it's very.
yeah, I have to do an order because that it progresses. It totally. And so if I write a scene toward the end, well, I still don't really know who she is yet.
Yeah. And so then you have to go back and layer it in.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
later, and you've got a fan club for Adler.
Oh, yeah.
He's their favorite bad boy that you've written, I guess. So are there characters that are a lot like you, and or are your heroines a lot like you? And what I always tell people is each heroine has a piece of me.
Yeah, I'd say
it's always fun when my best friends are reading them and they'll go, oh, I just came to this part, that's so like you. And I'm like, well, in some of them it's more the quirk is like me, and others it's the whatever journey God has me on is what my heroine's going through, or he's trying to get my attention by what she's going through, or you know, things like that.
Yeah. I'm trying to think of the heroine who's most like me personality wise. It was probably, and this is very typical of writers, Ellie Miller, my very first novel. And we tend to do in our first novel is write ourselves.
Yeah.
And so personality wise, she's very close to me. Although she's a ball bearings heiress. I'm no heiress, but but personality wise, she's most like me. But yeah, a piece of me is in each one, and it's always fun to you're talking about the family recognizing things. I always throw in lines that are like inside jokes in the family, and my mom's always finding them. And she just finished when Twilight Breaks, and she just said, she goes, oh, that what you put Peter and Evelyn through, I can't believe you did that. She says, what kind of devious mind do you have? And I said, I emailed her back, said, well, Mom, you raised me. I said, this is the mother. She's a mystery reader, and she would always give me the synopses of all the mysteries she was reading. So, all these crimes and things like that. And she was also one who is always imagining what could go wrong. It's the one who says, never put your purse in the grocery cart. You always keep it over your shoulder with one hand on it at all times so nobody can snatch it. If you put it in the grocery cart and you turn around, somebody can grab your purse. And you don't put your purse on the front seat of your car because somebody could smash the window. She read a story in the newspaper once where somebody smashed the window and grabbed the purse from the front seat. So always put it on the floor. So my mom's always imagining the most horrible things that can go wrong. And she knows about them because of all these articles that she's read. So she'd tell me about all these. She still does. She'll email me things like, this is the latest crime. Please watch out for it. So it's like, say, yeah, Mom, that's where it comes from.
Hilarious. So is there any, Janice asks, is there any part of you that's in your heroes? And for me, my heroes tend to have little pieces of my husband in them.
It's the weirdest thing. I often find that I identify most strongly with the hero in my story than I do with the heroine. It's the weirdest thing. I often feel their plight more heavily than I do the heroine. Sometimes it's different, but I really enjoy writing the male point of view.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, me too.
God, yeah, it is. And God blessed me with a wonderful husband and with 2 sons, and they're grown now. And I think my love for my sons through my love for my heroes, because always seeing, both my sons are over 6, I think 5'11", 6 foot. They both have beards. So, they're I have a Navy veteran, for heaven's sake. He's a big guy. But I still see the little boy.
Yeah.
I think that's such a key to writing a great hero, is still recognizing the little boy, and as well as the man who he is. And so I'm really thankful that the Lord gave me boys, and as well as my lovely daughter, who I just love more each day. But yeah, I really love writing and sometimes I think I actually can find more of my heroes that I've really identified with. So yeah.
Until the last few books, and it's interesting. I literally took through the first 30 books where the heroes would be like these fully formed people, and they'd be like, your heroine, we still need to work on it. And I'm like, seriously? seriously, because I'm like, that should be the easy part. And for me, it actually is, that has been the part I've had to work on the most. And now I can tell I've grown in it because I'm not hearing that anymore from readers or from editors. But I always just, that always would catch me off guard. I'm like, really? The hero? I'm a hero factory. Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
I really like my hero.
But it's just kind of funny because I'm like, oh, well, that's not what I would have expected to hear, but okay. So in our last like 2 minutes, because I want to honor your time, what are some of the books you've been reading? So like, of course, I've been gushing about this one for a while. Aw,
It's literally, I have a stack. My sister is a very avid reader, and so we have a I get them, and then I pass them down to her. I say I've got a stack here for her, and I'm going to go through each of them because they're amazing. So yes, Lethal Intent, amazing legal thriller, pharmaceutical industry, amazing. Just finished Shadows of the White City by Jocelyn Green. Oh, it's so good. And I always love Laura France. I mean, her writing is just so beautiful. And debut book, Dancing Donegal, Jennifer Dybel, loved it.
I've heard such good things about that one. It's on my Kindle. I need to actually, my Kindles, they disappear. So I need to pull it back up.
And I got to endorse this one. Oh my gosh, so good.
My copies, oh, we can have twin copies again.
You have to read it very carefully. You have to like, every time you start a chapter, you have to like note who it is and what year it is. You have to be a very careful reader. But
yeah, because that one, it's split time, but it's all within the war, but it jumps back and forth and between a couple of characters and their time in the war.
You have to like each time like ground yourself. Okay, oh, this is 1939. Okay, oh, this was 1944. And if you remind yourself of that, it's a beautiful book.
Yeah. Oh, and so much, and it's fun because I know your next book is in Paris, and I've got an idea at some time if I write World War II again, I'll do.
And what was fun was as I'm reading this, I finished my World War II research, and I'm always hesitant to read a book that's in an area that I really researched. But Christy does a research, and I'm reading this going, yep, read that, yep. Oh, I know what you said. It's great. So yeah,
author who cares about the research, you're not pulled out, and that's one of the reasons I love your books and I love Christy's, because I know you've done the research. I'm not gonna be like jolted out of it. Another one I just read, I used to read all of Mary Keneally's, and for some reason, like her last series I hadn't. This one is so good. She does
that. Jody Headland. Oh,
I grabbed the wrong one. But yes, Jody Headland's wonderful too. But Mary Keneally's next one is amazing. Yeah. That's hilarious.
Oh, and I don't have the book yet, but Melanie Dobson's next one in March, World War II. So good. I mean, she's another one where she does the research and are amazing. So yeah.
And then Christy Hunter, I held up one of the other covers, but I just read her next one that's coming out. This is one of the wonderful things about being authors, folks. You may notice Sarah and I are reading all these books before they come out, and it's wonderful. But then I'm going back and I'm literally binging all the prior series, because in the latest one, she references so many of the characters. It's like, oh, I have to go back and reread all the stories, and it's so much fun. Just like this has been so much fun. Is it Cowboy for Keeps? Oh, yep. This one, Jody Headland, not Mary Keneally, but Mary Keneally's is fantastic too. So thank you so much, Sarah. It was so good.
It was so much fun.
And good luck with the writers conference this week that you're helping to run. So Sarah, for those of you, I've seen many of you are talking about writing and the books that you're working on. And I can tell you right now, Sarah and I have co-taught at American Christian Fiction Writers. She's one of my favorite teachers when it comes to how to write fiction and how to do it right. So anytime you get a chance to learn from Sarah, you absolutely should. So
it's not too late to register for the West Coast Christian Writers Conference. We're online, so you can live anywhere.
There you go. So this is a great time if you've never been able to go to a writers conference, because so many of the great ones are online, and that makes it so much more accessible. Stay tuned for details on ACFW as well. That'll be in September. And thank you again for joining me. It's so good to see you until we can actually be in the same physical space. And good luck with the continuing launch of Where Twilight Breaks. And thanks so much for joining us, everyone.